Hi everyone, welcome. What you see here is my tracking spreadsheet. It's where I keep information about all of my active worm bins so that I can feel like, I know what's going on. Because with this many active worm bins, sometimes it's kind of a juggling act to remember, hey, when did I last feed? Or, was that last feeding a big feeding? That's not even really tracked here in terms of the volume of the feedings. To see that, I would have to actually go back to the video I created on that feeding to refresh my memory. But the information that I do track is, stuff like what type of worm there is in the bin, how long it's been since the last bin was fed, how old the bin is, how many feedings it's received, etc., so on. So a whole bunch of information that I consider to be fairly important for the maintenance and management of my bins. And a lot of times what I'll do here is sort of map out the next couple days, and as you can see there's a gap of 6 days between these days here. It's because I will be away here in between these two dates, and this just sort of helps me get a handle on whether or not I'm on top of everything. This way nothing is neglected, and I prioritize taking care of the things that do need my attention, and then plan to take care of the rest of the stuff once I get back, stuff that has more recently gotten attention and can wait a little while till I get back to it. So in this particular example, today's date is the 16th, and today my game plan is to check in on these two bins here, and once I do, I'll fill in the pertinent information where these kind of open boxes occur. The open boxes are my little homespun symbol for kind of, if nothing else, a checkbox, but usually some sort of information goes in there. So once today's work is done here, I'll enter the fact that a video was prepared on today's feeding, and then I'll bring over the annotation to show that today was the last time it was fed, and then these counters will stop to show that from the time this was fed, 10 days had passed until the next feeding, and from the time that this one was fed, 7 days had passed until the next time it was fed. And over here you can see these two were fed on separate days previously, but today we're going to actually feed them on the same day. Something we hinted at last time we had checked in on maybe both of these bins. I might have already talked about the idea of actually feeding these together, because if you look at their dates, they're only a week apart in terms of their age, and sometimes I do like to feed bins in such a way that I can compare one to the other. Sometimes that's a good telltale to show that things are working properly, because if they're about the same age, they should be making the same general progress, and if one or the other seems like it's not really doing the same as the other, maybe there's something that's really going good there that I should try to replicate in the other bin, or maybe something's going not so good that I need to tend to and take care of in the other bin. So I do feel that there's an advantage sometimes to tending to things at once rather than separately. And I guess the other reason is because since there's going to be a gap here, I am trying to take care of a bunch of stuff between now and today before I go away, so that's why I've crammed a bunch of stuff into a single day, which I would normally spread out over multiple days. So there's a kind of a two-pronged idea there as to why I'm doing it this way. So we're going to head on downstairs and check in on these two bins of ENCs, which are at this present time 76 and 69 days old, and we're going to put a little bit of food in there just to make sure that they're good for the next foreseeable week or week and a half until the next time we can check in on them. So let's head on down to the basement into my wormery and check in on how these bins are doing, give them some food and whatever else they need. So here are the two bins that we're going to be checking in on today, and I guess before we disrupt what's happening here and bring the bins up on the bench, you can see that there's a little, oh, there it is. I guess we found the spider web, and oops, sorry spider. I guess the spider might not even be in the web because I didn't see any movement. But it's interesting to see how many insects that little spider has managed to capture and kill. So it's kind of cool. It's almost like having my own little private bug zapper in my wormery down here, taking care of any intruding insects that don't really belong down here. All right, let's get these up on the bench and see what we got going on. Alright, so I bought out the younger of the two bins, the one that's a little bit older, the one that we saw the spider's nest on. And when I looked back there just a moment ago, I saw the spider came back and was kind of trying to already repair the mess that we made of his web. I felt bad for the little guy, so I kind of evicted him in a way, but right onto the shelf above where he was. And then I also knocked off all those dead bugs from the cardboard there, so that we can just bring that bin up to the bench here when the time comes to feed it. And we won't be disturbing the little spider. In fact, the spider is now kind of on a standby location where he can return to that bin once I put it back down. Hopefully he doesn't start moving in right away. Otherwise I'll have to evict him again when we get down to feeding that bin. But we're going to start here on the younger of the two bins. Now, from what I remember, I didn't really feed that generously on either of these bins last time I had checked in. So rather than first assessing the food requirements for this bin and then heading upstairs to get some stuff, I went ahead and I just kind of grabbed a few handfuls of food and threw them in this plastic bag here and brought it down with me in the anticipation that we're going to just go kind of heavy on the feeding on both of these bins, and that means these bins will both be good to go for a while without me needing to worry about them as far as food is concerned. So now, I did kind of anticipate that we might bump into leftovers. It's usually the case, because my feedings often consist of a variety of foods that can be eaten pretty quickly, combined with other foods that sometimes take a little while. And here you've got, for example, an avocado, and like the tough outer shell of an avocado usually takes a while, as well as the tough little seed of the avocado. And I didn't really want to break this avocado up. The only thing I did was I went in here with the knife and I made some puncture holes on the skin to provide the worms with access. And as I look in, I could see worms inside the holes, even some worms kind of hanging out of the holes. So that's kind of almost like an experimental item left to kind of break down over time on its own without my help. Here we've got another one which got a little bit more help. It was actually cut in half. There's no seed here. It's just the open avocado. And you know, I think these avocados actually go back quite a number of feedings at this point. And it does kind of surprise me to see that there's still so much left over. It's making me wonder if I'm going to be going a little bit overboard on giving these guys a big generous feeding today. Because look at this, even cantaloupe melon leftovers, which is really unusual. So I'm wondering if I should maybe be a little bit sparing on what I give them today, since they do have a number of leftovers still here that they've not yet done away with. Well, let's just continue on here, and then we'll make the call on that when it comes time to drop in the food. Maybe there's no harm in being generous. What do we have here? I felt another large item here. You know, some of these things, this just classifies, again, it's sort of like the avocado, as sort of a slow composting item. It's the seed out of a mango. And you can see the seed inside this husk has already been kind of accessed. The husk is sort of opening up. But something like that's going to certainly take a long time, so I don't really treat those as the sort of leftovers that the worms can really take full advantage of right away if I gave them nothing. So if there was nothing else, I'd feel bad, but with that big, whatchamacallit, that big chunk of leftover cantaloupe rind, you know, as well as other things like these banana stems, although these definitely are pretty far along at this point. You know, avocado, all the soft avocado stuff in the middle really makes me wonder how come it's not being consumed. I mean, there's worms in there and they're eating it, but that's the sort of thing you would normally expect to see gone pretty quickly. Perhaps I've overestimated the number of worms in this system. I don't know. Maybe there's something in here that's causing them to slow down their feeding for whatever reason. Couldn't imagine what that would be, because I don't see anything that would appear to be a problem so far. Hopefully it stays that way. So, I don't know, what do we do? Here too, stuff like these corn cob bits, those are slow, on the slow composting list as well. Things that take a while to break down. You know, I said we just go for it. We're just going to go ahead and plop in half of what I bought down here for these guys, assuming that the other half is equally needed in the other bin, and we'll just kind of equally feed both bins at the same time with more or less the same amount of stuff. So I've got some shredded paper here that we're going to use as sort of a foundational bedding to place beneath the food. And the food items are really just a variety of things that I pulled out of my freezer. So we're going to just reach in here randomly and pull out a couple handfuls of stuff for them. Let's see what they're getting today. I'm going to go with handful number 1. Handful number 2. And what do we got? There's a variety of, I could see radishes that I can clearly identify. This I'm not sure what it is. Might have been some sort of like a vegetable that came out of a soup. So it's been cooked, and it's probably something the worms should be able to eat pretty easily, although, I don't know. For some reason I thought that cooked foods somehow take a while. Here we've got some apple skins and other random things, but, you know, here's what remains, and that's probably about another 2 handfuls. So I want to leave the rest for the other bin. How does that sound? I guess before we cover up the feeding area, I'm dropping in some of this crushed eggshell, which is the grit that I use in my worm bins. And then before we start covering up, let's just return all these old food items. So between the old food and the new food, these little guys have plenty to keep them sustained for a while. So I certainly don't have to worry about them. I guess before we do cover everything up here, why don't we... I'd like to explore the rest of the bin really quickly before we cover up here. I'm just curious, you know, I thought I'd find more worms down where the food was. And since we didn't, I would have to assume that they're kind of hanging out elsewhere in the bin. So I'd like to see on the outer edges what we've got going on before we cover up. We've got a lot of nice castings going on here. We've got some toilet paper tubes, a variety of different types of cardboard paper, leaves, all these different carbon food sources for them to nibble on. But not a lot of leaves, not a lot of worms on this outer edge. Unusual. Maybe my estimate of how many worms are in this system is just a little bit inflated or something. You might have noticed on the spreadsheet I've got an estimated 1,000 worms in here. But this is the bin that kind of got resurrected after it started showing signs of distress. So we pulled out all the material that I thought was kind of going anaerobic and becoming unhealthy for the worms to be in. And I do assume that I lost a good number of worms before I sort of got smart and tried to fix their environment for them. But we still sort of gave an estimate with a little bit of benefit of the doubt baked in, suggesting that there's maybe still about 1,000 worms in here. But somehow as I look around, I just sort of get the sense that maybe that's not the case. So maybe this food that we just gave them will be enough to last for quite a while. If we keep checking these bins side by side, and this one still has a lot of leftovers, maybe in a future check-in we'll simply make sure they're okay and skip feeding. And if the other bin does need a feeding, we'll give it food at that time. But I think for now, we're in pretty good shape here. Even though the stuff on the very top surface is a little bit dry, once you start picking down into the lower layers of the bin, you do start to find some nice, comfortable, damp material. So I think between the existing moisture that's in here already, as well as all those frozen foods that they're getting, we should be in pretty good shape as far as moisture content in this bin. So I think we're more or less done here. We're going to cover up and get the other bin out here to check on how it's doing, give it the remainder of the food that we bought down. And hopefully the little spider hasn't already moved in. I might have to evict him before bringing that other bin out here. Alright, so let's go get that other bin. Alright. This is the older of the two. A little bit older, not by much, a week older. You could see paper coverings, cardboard on top of that, a coffee filter to show where the feeding last occurred, leaves on top. They're all being managed in a very similar fashion. The other thing, though, that you might have noticed a little different is that in the past I'd always used some of the existing leaves to sort of blend into the feeding area and then apply a fresh top coat of new leaves. I figured on this go around maybe I would just hold off and not go as generous on the bedding as I had in the past, because at least in that other bin I did sense that there was, you know, plenty of bedding. So even though I've been trying to be pretty generous on the bedding, and even though we did apply some, you know, we gave some shredded paper in the feeding area before applying the food, I really don't want to go overboard either, because too much of a good thing could be the root of problems too. So here, this is a little different than we saw in the other bin, right? Here, as we start to probe into the feeding area from last time, there are obviously more worms hanging out in here than we saw in the other bin. This population might be a little bit larger, even though they're both listed in my tracking spreadsheet as being 1,000 worms in each. It is quite possible that this system's got more worms in it. In fact, it's pretty likely if you just, you know, base it on what we're seeing, comparing the two. So what I've got here in my hand is similar stuff that we saw before, an old mango seed, which I have sort of mixed results with. Sometimes you pick one of these up and you see tons of worms hanging out on the inside of them, as you see here. A very popular item here, but in the other one we hardly saw any action around the mango seed that we bumped into. This is another mango seed. This one feels a little different. Also has a good number of worms hanging out on it. And what else do we have as far as leftovers? Those are what I classify as slow composting food items. Stuff that I do kind of expect to see as leftovers in the bin over the course of many weeks coming back. We'll see what else we bump into in here. This is unusual. It seems kind of like paper. I don't know if this is just a wad of paper bedding that sort of turned into a clump, or is this some sort of a food item? It's kind of weird the way it's a little bit mushy, but I could see what appears to be writing all over it. I try to avoid letting the paper that I use as bedding get clumpy like that, but it happens sometimes. It's good to see that the worms are actually actively working on it though, because there were worms kind of hanging out all over it. Here too, a little bit of clumped up bedding material, but not a whole lot as far as other leftover foods are concerned. So this bin does seem to be, I don't know, maybe working its food supply down a little bit more quickly than the last bin that we checked in on, possibly because it's got a larger population in it. I don't really intend to update or correct my tracking information in my spreadsheet per se, but we might at some point if it becomes really obvious. If we keep kind of working these two bins together and comparing and contrasting, it wouldn't be realistic to treat them both as having the same number of worms in them if they are not the same. Then we could just kind of dial in the portions that we give them a little bit better too. Make sure we leave a little bit more for this one next time as opposed to giving them equal amounts. So here too, kind of slow composting food items, chunk of corn cob. But you know, everything that we found as far as leftovers are all slow composting type food items. So this bin I think is going to appreciate getting fed today. Oops. Let's make sure that little wormy doesn't crawl out. All right, so let's give this one the same treatment. I think I am going to try to manage them in a very similar way. which would afford me the opportunity to compare them and kind of run them side by side to a certain degree, even though the populations are obviously not quite the same as far as worm count. But each system's got a couple older, slow composting bits of stuff in it. It's got a good amount of leftover bedding, so here too I think I'm going to limit the fresh bedding that I applied today to what you just saw me add now. The food supply we're plopping in, as you saw on the other system, as well as what you see here, is very similar in content. I mean, even these things here, like for example these cucumbers, they're going to go quick. Those are really popular items. They're pretty much all water if you think about it. The radishes, I'm sure they'll go pretty quick too. They're probably going to go pretty quickly as well, because they were kind of rotted already. They were sort of mushy and gooey to the touch before they got frozen. So once they thaw, I think that they're going to get quite mushy and easy to eat. So here too, I'm just curious to see what things look like on the outskirts of the bin. Just noticing this is sort of a interesting. This is this is a piece of a avocado pit. And lately, you know, avocado pits are like a big hard marble. So I've been cutting them up into little chunks, as I did here. And this little chunk of avocado seed actually started sprouting and growing. It's so cool. But whatever. I'm not looking to grow an avocado tree, unlike some other worm channels. Here, I'm just looking to see the material get composted, so I don't want the worms to perceive this as a living organism. I'd rather see them perceive it as a piece of rotting vegetation that they can eat, so let's help it become just that. And like we did before, I think we're going to take a little quick peek around the outer edges of the bin too to see what we could see. There's a good amount of worms in here, quite clearly more than in the other system that we just checked in on. So let's see how the outskirts of these systems here look as well. Perhaps not as many worms out here on the outer edges as we saw in the other bin. I guess because there's a lot more feeding happening over here. Another worm trying to sneak out of the bin. Let's try to make sure we don't have any escapees here. Because if they end up on the table and I still spot them and I put them back, that's one thing, they'll be fine. But if they end up somewhere I don't spot them, they could really end up in a space that they're pretty much going to dry out and die in. We will not have that happen, even if it's just a single worm. I wouldn't want that to happen. So we're, I think we're looking at a bin here that's a little bit more heavily populated, a little bit more productive as far as breaking down foods. And, you know, the fact that it's just a week older than the other one isn't really the difference. I believe it is mainly because it's probably a slightly larger population than the other system is. Here too, we see a pretty good number of worms hanging out on the outskirts of this side. And the castings look really nice too. That I believe is clearly a sign of the fact that we've got just more worms here. Perhaps not so much the fact that it's a week older, but perhaps more because of the fact that it's a larger worm population working the material down in here. I mean, here, I'm wondering if I might want to add some fresh leaf cover. But no, you know what? Let's stick to the idea of maybe managing these two consistently with one another for a little while and see how we do. I'm trying to remember, did we put in grit with the food? A lot of times I don't want to open up the feeding area after I've finished because, I don't know, seems like it might be bad luck, but I do see signs of grit. I think I did apply some. Just shows how my memory is fading in my old age here. Let's give them some more just because of the fact that I did open it up for that purpose of applying grit. For that reason, they get a little bit more, little bonus grit for these guys. Okay, So it looks like my European night crawlers are all doing pretty good. It would be kind of nice if both bins had an equal number of worms in them. Maybe at some point we'll see if we can sort of drive them to completion around the same time, and then see what we could do about creating new bins in the next go around that have more equal numbers of European night crawlers in them, so we can have a greater opportunity to compare apples to apples going forward. But for now, this looks pretty cool. I can't complain. So let's put this bin back where it was. Hopefully the little spider is going to move back in here and keep doing his job of getting rid of the flying insects. At least I can hope that's going to happen. But that's it for the video. I've got a little bit of cleaning up to do and putting things away, which is boring, so I won't include that. I'll just say goodbye for now. Thanks for watching. I appreciate your company. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please remember to give me a quick thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.